You work as hard as anyone, but success seems to elude you while others advance rapidly around you. You're starting to question whether you have what it takes to reach the next level, wondering if there's a secret formula that successful people know while you remain stuck despite your best efforts and good intentions. I am Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who maintained inner peace while ruling the most powerful empire in history and bearing the weight of millions of lives. Through my daily practice of Stoic principles, I discovered that true achievement comes not from external circumstances, but from mastering the fortress of your own mind. What I learned about the Stoic formula for massive achievement will transform your entire approach to success, giving you the mental resilience that turns pressure into power and obstacles into opportunities. The same philosophy that sustained me through plagues, wars, and the burden of empire can guide you to break through success in today's world. But first, like this video, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far the need for inner strength has spread. I never sought the purple cloak of empire. When Antoninus Pius adopted me at 17, I thought I understood what power meant. I was wrong. True understanding came 21 years later, when I stood in the Senate House and felt the weight of imperial purple settle on my shoulders like chains forged from the expectations of 65 million souls. The morning of my accession in 161 AD, I woke before dawn as was my custom, but this dawn was different. This was the day I would become the most powerful man on earth, yet I felt more powerless than ever before. I walked to my window and looked out over Rome, stretching endlessly toward the 7 hills, and I realized that every single person in that vast city would now depend on my decisions for their prosperity, their safety, their very lives. Most men dream of such power. I had learned enough philosophy by then to understand it was the heaviest burden any mortal could bear. In that moment, standing alone in my chamber, I made a decision that would define my entire reign. I would not rule as a man drunk on power, but as a servant chained to duty. The first test came within hours. A delegation of senators arrived, eager to curry favor with their new emperor. They brought lists of enemies to punish, friends to reward, policies to reverse. They expected the usual game of imperial favoritism. Instead, I dismissed them with words that shocked the entire palace. I will not govern by revenge or preference, but by justice and reason alone. This was my first lesson in the paradox of true achievement. The moment you gain external power, you discover that real strength comes from having the discipline to restrain that power. Every decision I made as emperor taught me that massive achievement is not about accumulating authority over others, but about developing unshakable authority over yourself. I remember the exact moment this truth crystallized for me. It was 3 months into my reign, and I was reviewing death sentences that required imperial approval. 57 men awaited my decision between life and death. The old Marcus might have signed quickly and moved on to more pleasant matters, but wearing the purple had taught me something profound. True power is not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to preserve. I spent 3 days reviewing each case, consulting philosophers, examining evidence, considering not just justice, but mercy. In the end, I commuted 43 of those sentences. The palace was scandalized. The Senate whispered about weakness. But I had learned the most important lesson of my life. The achievement that matters is not how much power you wield, but how much power you choose not to use. This became the foundation of my entire philosophy of achievement. Real success is not conquering others, but conquering the part of yourself that wants to conquer others. The purple cloak taught me that the moment you stop needing to prove your power is the moment you finally possess it. From that day forward, I understood that every external achievement, every victory, every accolade, every advancement was meaningless, unless it was built on the unshakable foundation of inner discipline. The empire I truly needed to conquer was not the world around me, but the world within me. Every emperor before me had servants wake them with news of the empire. I chose differently. I chose to wake myself in darkness before the world could make its demands upon me. This simple decision changed everything about how I approached achievement. My day began at the 4th hour before dawn, when Rome still slept, and even the palace guards dozed at their posts. I would rise from my bed, wrap myself in a simple cloak, and walk to a small chamber I had designated for one purpose. Alone, confronting myself before I confronted the world, in this quiet space, with only a single oil lamp for light, I would sit with my thoughts and a wax tablet. What I wrote in those dark hours became the foundation not just of my philosophy, but of every achievement that followed. I called it my morning preparation. Others might call it meditation, but I preferred to think of it as daily reconnaissance into the territory of my own soul. I would begin each session with the same question: what kind of man will I choose to be today? Not what kind of emperor, not what kind of ruler, but what kind of human being, because I had learned that all external achievement flows from this internal choice, made fresh each morning, renewed with each rising sun. Some mornings, I would write about the challenges ahead. Today, I will meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. But I won't be surprised or disturbed, for I can't imagine a world without such people. This wasn't pessimism, was preparation. By anticipating difficulty, I removed its power to derail my purpose. Other mornings, I would remind myself of what truly mattered. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. The empire needed an emperor, yes, but the world needed me to be fully human first. Every achievement that lasted began with this simple recognition. The practice taught me that massive achievement is not about grand gestures or momentous decisions. It's about the quality of attention you bring to each moment, starting with the first moment of consciousness each day. In those pre-dawn hours, I learned to separate the essential from the trivial, the urgent from the important, the emotional from the rationale. I would write reminders to myself: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. These weren't platitudes. They were battle plans for the day ahead. Each morning session was like sharpening a sword before combat, except the sword was my attention and the combat was the challenge of living with purpose. The real breakthrough came when I realized that this daily practice was not preparation for achievement, it was achievement itself. The man who could master his first hour could master his entire day. The man who could master his day could master his life. The man who could master his life could serve others from a place of strength rather than need. This is why I tell you, your greatest achievement each day is not what you accomplish in the world, but what you accomplish in yourself before the world wakes up. In the 2nd year of my reign, death came to Rome with a patience that terrified even the gods. The soldiers returning from Lucius Verus's campaigns in the east brought more than victory. They brought a plague that would kill 5 million souls across the empire. This was my crucible, the test that would prove whether philosophy could survive contact with absolute catastrophe. I remember the first reports reaching the palace. My advisors spoke in whispers about a minor illness affecting some districts. Within weeks, those whispers became screams as bodies piled in the streets faster than we could burn them. The mortality rate reached 25% in some regions. Rome had never faced anything like this, and neither had I. My first instinct was to flee, as many senators did, retreating to their villas in the countryside. Every rational voice told me to preserve the emperor's life for the good of the empire. But in my morning meditation that day, I wrote something that changed everything. The universe is transformation. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Crisis reveals character, it does not create it. I chose to stay in Rome, not as a gesture of bravery, but as an expression of my philosophy. If Stoicism meant anything, it had to mean something when people were dying. If my beliefs could not sustain me when death stalked every street, then they were worthless abstractions, fit only for academic discussion. I walked among the sick personally. Despite the protests of my Praetorian Guard, I visited the makeshift hospitals, the quarantine areas, the mass burial sites, not because I thought my presence would cure anyone, but because leadership in crisis means sharing the burden of fear, not hiding from it. The plague taught me that true achievement is not about what you accomplish when conditions are favorable, but what you become when everything falls apart. I watched some of the empire's most celebrated citizens reveal themselves as cowards, while slaves and freedmen showed courage that shamed the nobility. Crisis strips away pretense and shows you who people really are, including yourself. My philosophy was tested daily when senators demanded we close the borders and sacrifice the provinces to save Rome. I had to choose between expedience and principle. When the people called for scapegoats, blaming Christians, Jews, foreigners, I had to decide whether justice mattered more than popularity. I chose principle every time, not because I was particularly noble, but because I had learned that abandoning your values in crisis guarantees you'll abandon them permanently. The man who compromises his integrity to survive will discover he has nothing left worth surviving for. The plague lasted 15 years. 15 years of watching an empire convulse with death and fear. But those same 15 years taught me the most important lesson about achievement. What you do when everything is falling apart matters more than everything you do when it's falling together. When the plague finally ended, Rome had lost nearly a quarter of its population, but something else had been born: a deeper understanding of what it means to lead, not from a position of strength, but from a commitment to serve others, regardless of personal cost. This is why I tell you, your greatest achievements will not come in your comfortable moments, but in your crucible moments. When crisis demands you choose between who you were and who you're called to become. The greatest obstacle to achievement is not external circumstances, but the stories we tell ourselves about those circumstances. I learned this truth the hard way, through years of watching capable people destroy themselves, not because of what happened to them, but because of how they chose to interpret what happened to them. Let me share with you the first and most crucial pillar of the Stoic formula for massive achievement: the discipline of perception. This is the practice of seeing things as they actually are, stripped of the emotional interpretations and judgmental additions that our minds automatically attach to every experience. I discovered this principle during my early years as emperor, when a senator named Cassius launched a rebellion in the eastern provinces. The news reached me while I was dealing with Germanic tribes on the northern frontier. My first reaction was rage, then fear, then a spiral of catastrophic thinking about civil war, the collapse of the empire, and the failure of my reign. But in my morning meditation the next day, I forced myself to examine the situation with what I call objective representation. I wrote, "Cassius believes I am dead and acts to preserve the empire. His rebellion is based on false information, not treachery. The Eastern legions follow him out of loyalty to Rome, not hatred of me. This crisis is an opportunity to demonstrate clemency and wisdom by seeing the situation as it actually was, rather than through the lens of my wounded ego. I found a path forward that strengthened rather than weakened my position. When I learned that Cassius had been killed by his own men upon discovering I was alive, I chose not to punish his followers, but to honor their loyalty to what they believed was Rome's rightful ruler. This is how the discipline of perception works. You strip away the emotional coating that your mind adds to events and see only the facts. Most people live in a world of interpretations, not realities. They don't see a setback, they see a catastrophe. They don't see a challenge, they see an impossibility. They don't see a mistake, they see a character flaw. The practice begins with this recognition. Every event is neutral until you assign it, meaning a promotion is not inherently good or bad. It depends on how you respond to it. A failure is not inherently shameful or educational. It depends on what you choose to learn from it. An obstacle is not inherently destructive or strengthening. It depends on how you choose to engage with it. I trained myself to describe events in the most basic factual terms possible. Instead of "this terrible crisis is destroying everything I've worked for," I would write, "the situation has changed. New information requires new decisions." Instead of "my enemies are plotting against me," I would write, "some people disagree with my policies and are acting according to their understanding of Rome's best interests." This discipline transformed my capacity for achievement because it eliminated the emotional energy waste that comes from fighting reality. When you see things as they are, rather than as you wish they were or fear they might become, you can direct all your energy toward effective action rather than emotional reaction. The key insight is this: you cannot control what happens, but you have complete control over how you interpret what happens. This interpretation determines your emotional state, your available options, and ultimately your level of achievement. Master your perception, and you master your life. Practice this discipline daily. Look for the facts beneath your interpretations. Find the opportunity hidden in every obstacle. This is the foundation upon which all other achievement rests. For 13 years, I lived not in the marble halls of Rome, but in a leather tent on the Germanic frontier, leading campaigns against tribes whose names most Romans couldn't pronounce. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Sarmatians. These were not the civilized enemies of our grandfathers' wars, but fierce warriors who knew their forests better than we knew our own streets. It was there, in the mud and cold of the Danube frontier, that I truly learned what achievement means. Not the kind measured in territory conquered or enemies defeated, but the kind that emerges when you maintain your principles under conditions that would break most men's spirits. I remember my first winter campaign in 170 AD. We were camped near modern-day Vienna, and the Germanic tribes had adopted a new strategy. Instead of meeting us in open battle, they melted into their forests and struck our supply lines, our messengers, our isolated detachments. It was warfare designed to frustrate and demoralize, and it was working. My generals urged me to adopt their tactics to burn villages, enslave civilians, show the same brutality we faced. This is how you win wars against barbarians, they argued. Virtue is a luxury we cannot afford on the frontier. But in my tent that night, by the light of a single candle, I wrote words that would guide me through 13 years of warfare. Just because others abandon virtue does not mean you must. Your character is not dependent on their character. This became my test. Could I remain a philosopher while leading armies? Could I practice stoicism while waging war? Could I achieve victory without sacrificing the very principles that made victory worthwhile? The answer came not in grand moments, but in daily decisions. When we captured Germanic prisoners, I insisted they be treated according to Roman law, not frontier justice. When our own soldiers committed atrocities, I punished them regardless of their rank or record. When tribal leaders requested parley, I met with them personally, showing the respect that honor demanded. My staff thought I was weak. Some even whispered about replacing me with a more practical commander. But I had learned something crucial about achievement. The means you use to reach your goals become part of the goal itself. Victory achieved through abandoning your principles is not victory, it's corruption disguised as success. The breakthrough moment came during the siege of a Quadi stronghold. We had surrounded their hill fort for weeks, and starvation was forcing them toward surrender. My engineers proposed a strategy that would have ended the siege quickly, but would have resulted in massive civilian casualties. The military argument was compelling. End the siege, save Roman lives. Move on to the next objective. I spent the night walking alone around our camp's perimeter, wrestling with the decision. In the morning, I chose a longer siege that preserved both Roman honor and Germanic lives. It took 3 additional weeks, cost us more supplies, and made the campaign season longer. But when the stronghold finally surrendered, their chieftain said something I'll never forget. We surrender not just to Roman power, but to Roman honor. That moment taught me the deepest truth about sustainable achievement. Real victory is not defeating your enemies. It's remaining worthy of victory even when victory seems impossible. The tribes we conquered with honor became allies. The ones we might have crushed through brutality would have become eternal enemies. The Germanus' campaigns showed me that achievement under pressure reveals your true character. Anyone can be virtuous when it's easy. The measure of a person is what they do when virtue costs them something, when doing right means working harder, waiting longer, or accepting greater risk. This is why I tell you, your greatest achievements will not come from abandoning your principles under pressure, but from discovering how much strength your principles can give you when everything else fails. The second pillar of the Stoic formula for massive achievement seems paradoxical to most people. You achieve more by desiring less, not by wanting nothing, but by fundamentally changing your relationship with wanting itself. I learned this lesson not through philosophy books, but through the painful recognition of how my own desires had become my greatest obstacles. Early in my reign, I wanted everything to go perfectly. I wanted the Senate to support every policy, the people to love every decision, the provinces to prosper without conflict, the barbarians to respect our borders. I wanted the empire to run as smoothly as a well-oiled machine, with myself as the masterful operator who could control every moving part. This wanting was my torment. Every setback felt personal. Every criticism stung like a wound. Every problem that arose seemed to mock my competence. I was achieving many things by any external measure, but I was miserable because reality persistently refused to match my desires. The transformation began during a particularly difficult period when everything seemed to go wrong simultaneously. The plague was raging. Germanic tribes were raiding our borders. The treasury was strained, and several senators were openly questioning my policies. I found myself lying awake at night, mentally rehearsing conversations, planning responses to criticism, strategizing how to make people see things my way. One morning, exhausted from another sleepless night, I wrote something that changed my entire approach to achievement. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But more importantly, I wrote this: don't demand that things happen as you wish that they happen as they do, and you will go on well. This was not passive resignation, it was active acceptance. Instead of wasting energy fighting reality, I began to work with it. Instead of demanding that circumstances conform to my desires, I started shaping my desires to align with what was actually happening. The practical application was revolutionary. When the Senate rejected one of my proposals, instead of viewing it as a personal failure, I began to see it as information about what was politically possible. When Germanic tribes mounted new raids, instead of rage about their audacity, I felt curiosity about their tactics and motivations. When the plague continued, despite our medical efforts, instead of despair about my inability to stop it, I focused on what we could control: our response, our care for the sick, our preparation for recovery. This discipline taught me that most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from the gap between what happens and what we want it to happen. Close that gap not by controlling events, but by aligning your preferences with reality, and you eliminate a massive source of emotional drain that most people never recognize. The key insight is this: Every moment you spend wanting things to be different from how they are is a moment unavailable for dealing effectively with how they actually are. Desire that is not aligned with reality is a form of self-imposed paralysis. I learned to practice what I called preferring what happens, not because everything that happens is good, but because everything that happens is real, and reality is the only place where achievement is possible. You cannot build anything lasting on a foundation of wishful thinking. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting injustice. It means recognizing that your power lies not in controlling outcomes, but in choosing your response to whatever outcomes arise. When you stop needing things to be different, you become free to make them better. Practice this for 1 week. Catch yourself every time you think this shouldn't be happening and replace it with this is what's happening. So how will I respond? Watch how this simple shift transforms both your peace of mind and your effectiveness in the world. In 169 AD, death took my brother. Not my brother by blood, but something deeper, my closest friend, the man who had shared the burden of empire with me for 8 years. Lucius Verus died suddenly on his way back from the Danubian campaigns, and with him died my illusion that anything in this world is permanent. I received the news while reviewing supply reports in my tent. A messenger arrived, mud-stained from hard riding, and spoke for words that changed everything. Caesar Verus is dead. The wax tablet I was holding fell from my hands. For a moment, the entire world went silent, as if the gods themselves were holding their breath. Lucius was everything I was not, charming where I was serious, beloved by the people where I was respected by the Senate, effortlessly popular where I worked hard for every alliance. He was also one of the few people who could make me laugh, who could challenge my ideas without threatening my position, who understood the weight of empire because he carried half of it himself. My first impulse was to rage against the unfairness of it. He was younger than me, stronger, full of plans for the future. We had discussed reforms we would implement together, building projects we would commission, the legacy we would leave jointly. Now all of that was simply ... gone, erased by a fever that struck a healthy man and killed him in 3 days. But as I sat alone that night, staring at the empty chair where Lucius used to sit during our evening strategy sessions, I realized that this loss was also a teacher. The pain I felt was proof of how much I had been attached to permanence, how much of my peace depended on things staying the same, people staying alive, plans unfolding as expected. I took out my writing tablet and forced myself to examine this truth. Everything I loved was temporary. My position as emperor, temporary. My health, temporary. My life itself, temporary. The empire the first served for all its apparent permanence was also temporary. Even Rome itself would one day be dust, and the gods, if they existed, would barely remember that we had ever lived. This could have been a source of despair, but instead, it became a source of liberation. If everything was temporary, then I could stop holding so tightly. If loss was inevitable, then I could stop pretending it wasn't. If death was certain, then I could start living as if it mattered that my time was limited. I began to see Lucius's death not as a tragedy that had derailed my plans, but as a reminder that had clarified my priorities. The reforms we had discussed, together I would implement them myself as a tribute to our friendship. The building projects we had planned, they would stand as monuments not just to Rome's glory, but to the partnership that had conceived them. More importantly, I learned to appreciate what remained rather than mourning what was lost. Every conversation with a friend became more precious because I knew it might be our last. Every sunrise became more beautiful because I understood that I would see only a finite number of them. Every moment of peace became a gift because I had stopped taking permanence for granted. This is the achievement that comes from accepting impermanence. You stop wasting time on trivial concerns and focus on what actually matters. You stop postponing important conversations and have them now. You stop taking people for granted and start treasuring them while they're here. Lucius's death taught me that the only way to truly honor what we love is to love it fully while we have it, knowing that we will lose it, grateful that we ever had it all. The third pillar of the Stoic formula for massive achievement is the discipline of action, the practice of ensuring that everything you do serves virtue and the common good. This is not about being busy or productive in the modern sense, but about aligning your actions with principles that create lasting value rather than temporary advantage. I learned this discipline through a mistake that haunted me for years. Early in my reign, a provincial governor requested permission to raise taxes in his region to fund local infrastructure projects. The proposal made economic sense, would improve trade routes, and had support from local merchants. I approved it without deeper consideration, focused on efficient administration rather than underlying justice. 6 months later, I received reports of unrest in that province. The tax increase had fallen disproportionately on small farmers, many of whom lost their land to wealthy collectors who could afford the new rates. What I had intended as progress had become oppression. What I had meant as improvement had created suffering. That night, I wrote in my journal, "In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present: I am rising to the work of a human being. Why then am I dissatisfied if I am going to do the things for which I exist and for which I was brought into the world?" But I added something else. The work of a human being is not just any action, but right action. Not just any achievement, but virtuous achievement. This led me to develop what I called the virtue filter, way of evaluating every decision according to the 4 cardinal virtues that should guide all human action. Before approving any policy, making any appointment, or taking any action, I would ask, is this just? Is this courageous? Is this temperate? Is this wise? Justice meant considering how my actions affected not just the immediate stakeholders, but everyone who might be touched by the consequences. The tax increase had been efficient, but not just because it ignored its impact on the most vulnerable citizens. Courage meant doing what was right, even when it was difficult, unpopular, or personally costly. This wasn't physical bravery, though. I had seen plenty of war, but moral courage. The willingness to stand by principle when expedience offered an easier path. Temperance meant moderation and self-control, avoiding the extremes that destroy good judgment. In the case of the tax policy, I had been intemperate in my desire for quick solutions. Failing to take time for thorough consideration. Wisdom meant understanding the long-term consequences of short-term actions, seeing beyond immediate results to lasting effects. True achievement comes not from solving today's problems, but from solving them in ways that don't create tomorrow's crises. I began requiring myself to articulate how each decision served the common good, not just Roman interests, but human welfare broadly conceived. This forced me to think beyond immediate political advantage to genuine improvement in people's lives. The discipline transformed not just my decision-making, but my understanding of what achievement actually means. I realized that most of what passes for success in the world is actually just elaborate forms of selfishness. People advancing their own interests while calling it progress. Real achievement serves something larger than yourself. It makes the world better, not just different. It creates value that outlasts your own life. It contributes to the flourishing of the whole human community, not just your immediate tribe. This is why I tell you, before taking any action, ask yourself these questions. Does this serve virtue? Does this contribute to the common good? Will I be proud of this decision on my deathbed? If the answer to any of these is no, find a different path. The discipline of action ensures that your achievements will be worth achieving and that your success will be success worth having. The cruelest test of my philosophy came not from external enemies, but from my own blood. My son, Commodus, whom I had groomed to inherit the empire, became everything I had fought against: corrupt, violent, obsessed with personal glory rather than public service. Watching him destroy the principles I had spent my life building taught me the hardest lesson about achievement. Sometimes doing what is right costs you everything you love. From his earliest years, I had tried to shape Commodus according to Stoic principles. I arranged for the finest tutors, exposed him to philosophy, brought him on campaigns to learn leadership. I wanted him to understand that power was a burden, to be born with wisdom, not a privilege to be enjoyed with abandon. But Commodus saw only the pageantry of empire, the crowds cheering, the senators bowing, the gladiators dying for his entertainment. Where I saw responsibility, he saw opportunity. Where I saw service, he saw indulgence. The throne I had treated as a sacred trust, he viewed as a personal playground. The breaking point came when he was 19. I discovered that he had been organizing private gladiatorial games in which condemned criminals fought to the death for his amusement. When I confronted him, his response chilled me. What is the point of being emperor if you cannot do whatever you wish? That night, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. Every instinct as a father wanted to protect my son, to make excuses for his behavior, to hope that time and experience would mature him. But every principle I held sacred demanded that I acknowledge what he had become, a threat to everything I had worked to build. I could have covered up his excesses, used my authority to shield him from consequences, gradually transferred power to him while hoping for the best. Many advisors counseled exactly this approach. He is young, they said. He will learn responsibility when he feels its weight. But I had learned that character reveals itself under pressure, and what I saw in Commodus under the pressure of power was not immaturity, but corruption. The question became, would I betray my principles to protect my son, or uphold my principles knowing it might destroy our relationship? I chose principle. I stripped Commodus of his command positions, cancelled his planned elevation to co-emperor, and began training other potential successors. I continued to love him as a father, but I could no longer trust him as a ruler. The personal cost was devastating. Commodus never forgave what he saw as my rejection. Our relationship became formal, distant, filled with the kind of resentment that festers in families where love and duty collide. I watched my son become a stranger, then an enemy, all because I refused to compromise the principles that made leadership meaningful. Yet I knew I had made the right choice. To hand the empire to someone unfit to rule would have been a betrayal not just of Rome, but of every citizen who depended on imperial justice. My duty as emperor had to supersede my desires as a father. This taught me the ultimate lesson about achievement. The price of integrity is sometimes everything you hold dear, but the price of abandoning integrity is always everything you are. Better to lose what you love while remaining who you are than to keep what you love by becoming someone you cannot respect. The tragedy is that in the end, despite all my precautions, Commodus did inherit the throne after my death. But I could not control that outcome. I could only control my own choices while I lived. This is why I tell you, when achievement demands you choose between love and principle, choose principle. Love without integrity is not love, it is enablement. An achievement built on compromised values is not achievement, it is elaborate. Failure disguised as success. In the chaos of governing an empire under siege, I discovered that the most important territory to defend was not the one marked by borders on maps, but the one that existed within the boundaries of my own mind. I learned to build what I called my inner citadel, unassailable fortress of peace that no external force could breach, no matter how powerful or persistent. The revelation came during the darkest period of the Marcomannic Wars, when everything seemed to be collapsing simultaneously. Germanic tribes were pushing deeper into Roman territory than they had in generations. The plague was devastating our population. The treasury was strained beyond its limits. Senators were questioning my leadership openly. Even the weather seemed to conspire against us, with harsh winters that made campaigning nearly impossible. It was during one particularly brutal night, when I received 3 separate reports of disasters: a failed harvest in Egypt, a rebellion in Britain, and the death of a trusted general, that I realized I had been fighting the wrong battle. I had been trying to control everything outside myself, while neglecting the one domain where I actually had complete authority, my own thoughts and responses. That night, I sat in my tent and wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But more importantly, I began to understand what this actually meant in practice. It meant building an inner space that remained calm regardless of external storms, peaceful regardless of external chaos, strong regardless of external pressures. The inner citadel is not a place of retreat from the world, but a place of preparation for engaging with the world. It is the mental and emotional fortress from which you can respond to any situation with clarity and purpose, rather than reacting from fear or impulse. I learned to construct this citadel through daily practice. Each morning, before dealing with any external demands, I would spend time fortifying my inner defenses. I would remind myself of what I could and could not control. I would review my principles and recommit to living by them regardless of circumstances. I would prepare my mind for whatever challenges the day might bring. The key insight was this: external events can touch your body, your possessions, your reputation, even your relationships, but they cannot touch your character unless you allow them to. Your inner citadel is the space where you choose who you will be in response to what happens to you. When Germanic warriors threatened our borders, they could kill Roman soldiers, but they could not kill Roman courage. When the plague ravaged our cities, it could destroy Roman bodies, but it could not destroy Roman determination. When senators questioned my policies, they could challenge my authority, but they could not compromise my integrity unless I chose to let them. This understanding transformed my capacity for achievement because it eliminated the emotional volatility that destroys effective decision-making. When you know that your essential self cannot be damaged by external events, you become free to respond to those events strategically rather than defensively. The inner citadel is built from several elements: clear thinking that separates facts from interpretations, emotional stability that remains steady under pressure, moral clarity that knows right from wrong regardless of consequences, and spiritual strength that finds meaning even in suffering. I learned to access this fortress whenever I felt overwhelmed. In the middle of difficult negotiations, I would mentally retreat to this space for a moment, remind myself of my principles, and then re-engage from a position of strength rather than reactivity. This is why I tell you, build your own inner citadel. Create a mental space where you are always safe, always strong, always clear about who you are and what you stand for. External achievement flows from this inner foundation. The world measures achievement by accession, wealth, power, territory, influence, recognition. I spent the first part of my reign pursuing this kind of success, only to discover that it was a fool's errand that left me emptier with each victory. The transformation came when I learned to measure achievement not by what I could gather to myself, but by what I could give of myself. The turning point was a conversation with an old philosopher named Junius Rusticus, who had been my teacher years before I became emperor. I was complaining to him about the frustrations of rule, how difficult it was to get senators to cooperate, how ungrateful the people seemed despite my efforts to serve them, how every solution seemed to create new problems. He listened patiently, then asked a question that changed everything. "Marcus, you speak of these challenges as if they are obstacles to your success. But what if they are your success? What if dealing with difficult people with patience is the achievement? What if serving ungrateful people with generosity is the victory? What if solving problems that create new problems is exactly what you were born to do? That conversation forced me to examine my entire understanding of what it meant to be successful. I had been thinking like a merchant, measuring my return on investment, expecting appreciation for my efforts. But Rusticus helped me see that this was exactly backwards. True achievement is not about getting something in return for your efforts. It is about making the effort itself worthwhile, regardless of the return. I began to understand that virtue is the only good that cannot be taken away from you. Wealth can be stolen, power can be lost, reputation can be destroyed, relationships can end. But your character, your courage, your justice, your wisdom, your self-discipline belongs to you completely and permanently. This realization revolutionized my approach to leadership. Instead of measuring success by whether the Senate approved my policies, I measured it by whether my policies were just. Instead of judging my effectiveness by whether the people loved me, I judged it by whether I had served them well. Instead of evaluating my reign by whether it brought me happiness, I evaluated it by whether it had contributed to human flourishing. The beautiful paradox is that when you stop needing external validation, you often get more of it. When you stop chasing recognition, you often achieve more recognition. When you stop demanding appreciation, you often receive more appreciation. But by then, it doesn't matter, because your sense of success is no longer dependent on these external rewards. I learned to find genuine satisfaction in the process rather than the outcome. The satisfaction of making a difficult decision based on principle rather than convenience. The satisfaction of maintaining composure under extreme pressure. The satisfaction of treating an enemy with dignity when you have the power to destroy them. This is not passive acceptance or lowered standards. It is the highest possible standard applied to the one thing you can actually control, your own character. It is demanding excellence from yourself in areas where excellence is actually possible. The world will tell you that success means having more than others, being above others, being recognized by others. But I discovered that real success means being useful to others, being of service to others, being worthy of others' trust, even when they don't appreciate it. When you redefine achievement this way, you become unstoppable, because your success no longer depends on circumstances beyond your control. You can achieve at the highest level in any situation, under any conditions, facing any obstacles. This is why I tell you, stop measuring your worth by external scorecards and start measuring it by internal standards. The only achievement that matters is becoming the kind of person you can respect, regardless of what the world thinks about it. One of the most powerful tools I developed for massive achievement seems counterintuitive to most people: regularly imagining the loss of everything. I valued this practice, which I called negative visualization, taught me to appreciate what I had while I had it, and prepared me mentally for any setback that might come. The technique emerged from a painful realization about human nature. I noticed that I had become completely accustomed to the privileges of imperial life, the deference of senators, the luxury of the palace, the power to shape policy with a word. What had once seemed miraculous had become expected, and what had once brought gratitude had become invisible. I was taking for granted the very things that millions of people could only dream of experiencing. Worse, because I expected these privileges. Any slight disruption, a senator's disagreement, a less than perfect meal, a delay in receiving information felt like a personal affront rather than a minor inconvenience. This ingratitude was not just making me unhappy, it was making me weak. When you expect everything to go perfectly, you become fragile in the face of imperfection. When you assume that good things will last forever, you become unprepared for change. So I began a daily practice that transformed my relationship with both fortune and misfortune. Each morning, I would spend a few minutes imagining the loss of various things I valued. I would picture the empire falling, my health failing, my advisors abandoning me, my friends betraying me, even my own death. This was not morbid pessimism, but practical preparation. By contemplating loss before it occurred, I could appreciate what I had while I had it and develop emotional resilience for when circumstances changed. The practice worked in two ways. First, it made me profoundly grateful for my present circumstances. After imagining the empire in ruins, the actual challenges we faced seemed manageable. After picturing myself dying alone, the company of even difficult senators became a gift. After contemplating total failure, partial setbacks became minor inconveniences. Second, it prepared me mentally for actual losses when they occurred. When Lucius Verus died, the grief was real but not shocking because I had already contemplated losing him. When Germanic tribes broke through our defenses, the military challenge was serious but not paralyzing because I had already imagined worse scenarios. I learned to apply negative visualization not just to circumstances but to people. I would occasionally imagine that this conversation with a friend might be our last, that this evening with my family might be our final time together, that this moment of peace might not come again. This didn't make me morbid, it made me present. The key insight is that everything you have is temporary, but most people live as if it is permanent. This creates two problems. They fail to appreciate what they have, and they are emotionally devastated when they lose it. Negative visualization solves both problems. The practice also revealed something profound about achievement itself. When you regularly contemplate losing everything, you realize that the most important achievements are internal ones that cannot be taken away. Your character, your wisdom, your capacity for virtue, these remain yours, even when everything else is gone. I would imagine scenarios where I lost my throne but retained my integrity, lost my wealth but kept my wisdom, lost my reputation but preserved myself. These visualizations showed me that my essential achievements were portable and permanent. This is why I tell you, regularly imagine losing what you have, not to make yourself miserable, but to make yourself grateful and resilient. The person who has prepared mentally for loss can handle any setback with grace. The greatest breakthrough in my understanding of achievement came when I stopped seeing myself as separate from the world around me and began to recognize that everything is connected in an intricate web of mutual dependence. The Stoics called this sympathia, the idea that all parts of the universe are interconnected, and that your individual success is inseparable from the flourishing of the whole. This insight transformed not just my philosophy, but my practical approach to leadership. I realized that the emperor who tries to achieve at the expense of his subjects will ultimately fail, just as the hand that strangles the body will eventually destroy itself. True achievement must serve the larger organism, of which you are merely one part. The understanding began during the plague years, when I was forced to see how interconnected everything really was. A disease that started in distant Mesopotamia reached Rome within months, carried by soldiers and traders along the very roads that represented our civilization's greatest achievement. Our strength, our vast network of connections, had become our vulnerability, but this same interconnection also revealed the source of our resilience. When Egypt's grain harvest failed, provinces across the empire shared their surplus. When Germanic tribes threatened one region, troops from distant areas marched to defend people they had never met. The empire survived, not because of central control, but because each part served the welfare of the whole. I began to apply this principle to my daily decisions as emperor. Instead of asking, how does this serve Marcus Aurelius, I started asking, how does this serve the network of relationships of which Marcus Aurelius is a part? This shift in perspective revolutionized my effectiveness as a leader. When negotiating with Germanic tribal leaders, I stopped seeing them as enemies to be defeated and started seeing them as potential partners in creating stability along our shared borders. When dealing with difficult senators, I stopped viewing them as obstacles to my policies and started seeing them as representatives of constituencies whose concerns I needed to understand. The sympathia principle taught me that sustainable achievement requires cooperation rather than domination. The leader who builds his success by diminishing others will find that his success is built on a foundation that cannot last. The leader who builds his success by elevating others creates a foundation that strengthens over time. I practiced this by constantly looking for ways to create win-win solutions. When provinces requested tax relief, instead of simply granting or denying the request, I would look for ways to restructure their obligations that served both local needs and imperial requirements. When generals requested additional troops, I would seek strategies that strengthened both their campaigns and overall military readiness. This approach extended to my personal relationships as well. I learned to see my wife not as someone who should support my goals, but as a partner whose flourishing was inseparable from my own. I began to view my advisors not as tools for implementing my vision, but as fellow participants in creating something larger than any of us could achieve alone. The most profound application was learning to see even my enemies as part of the same cosmic organism. The Germanic tribes attacking our borders were not alien invaders, but human beings responding to pressures and needs that I could understand and potentially address. The senators opposing my policies were not traitors, but citizens expressing legitimate concerns about governance. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or avoiding necessary conflicts. It means recognizing that even conflict can serve the health of the whole system when conducted with wisdom and restraint. The sympathia taught me that the highest achievement is not getting what you want, but contributing to a world where everyone can flourish. When you align your individual success with universal well-being, you tap into forces much larger than your personal will. This is why I tell you, stop seeing yourself as separate from others, and start seeing yourself as part of a vast network of mutual dependence. Your greatest achievements will come when you serve this larger organism, not when you serve only yourself. The defining moment of my reign came not during a victory, but during our greatest defeat. In 172 AD, a Germanic confederation led by the Marcomanni achieved something no barbarian force had accomplished in over 2 centuries. They broke through our Danubian defenses and reached the gates of Aquileia, less than 200 miles from Rome itself. The news reached me like a physical blow, but my response to this catastrophe became the foundation for everything that followed. My first instinct was the same as any leader facing disaster age: blame, desperate attempts to undo what had already happened. I wanted to execute the commanders who had failed, punish the provinces that had not provided adequate support, rage against the barbarians who had dared to threaten Rome's heartland. But in the darkness of my tent that night, I wrote words that changed my entire approach to setbacks. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This was not philosophical abstraction, but practical necessity. I had to transform this disaster into an opportunity, or watch the empire fragment under the pressure of panic and recrimination. The question was not how to avoid the crisis, it had already arrived, but how to use the crisis to strengthen rather than weaken what I was trying to build. Way began by reframing the Germanic breakthrough not as a failure of our defenses, but as information about our vulnerabilities that we could now address. Instead of punishment, I focused on learning what had made this attack possible. How could we prevent similar breakthroughs in the future? What did this reveal about changes in barbarian tactics and capabilities? The investigation revealed that our border defenses had become rigid and predictable, designed to repel the kinds of attacks we had faced in the past rather than adapting to new realities. The barbarians had succeeded not because they were stronger, but because they were more innovative. This setback forced us to completely rethink our approach to frontier defense. I turned the crisis into a catalyst for military reform. We developed more flexible defensive strategies, improved intelligence gathering about barbarian movements, and created rapid response forces that could reinforce threatened sectors quickly. The breakthrough that had seemed like a disaster became the teacher that made us stronger. But the deeper lesson was about the Stoic response to any setback. The external event, whether it's a military defeat, a business failure, a personal loss, or a public humiliation, is neutral until you decide what it means and how you will respond to it. The setback itself is not what determines your future. Your response to the setback is what shapes what comes next. I learned to ask 3 questions. Whenever facing any obstacle or failure, what can this teach me? How can this make me stronger? How can this serve the larger good? These questions transformed setbacks from sources of frustration into sources of growth. The Germanic breakthrough taught me that my frontier strategy needed updating. A failed policy taught me about political realities I had overlooked. A personal criticism taught me about blind spots in my character. Each setback became a teacher if I was willing to be a student. The key insight is that obstacles are not interruptions to your path. They are your path. The universe does not owe you a smooth journey toward your goals. The resistance you encounter is not a mistake in the cosmic plan. It is the cosmic plan. The strength you develop by overcoming obstacles is the real achievement, more valuable than whatever goal you thought you were pursuing. This is why I tell you, when setbacks command, they will do not waste energy lamenting what happened. Instead, ask what this setback is trying to teach you and how you can use it to become stronger than you were before the obstacle appeared. In the winter of 180 AD, as I lay in my tent along the Danube frontier, I knew with absolute certainty that I was dying. The fever that had taken hold of me would not break, and my body worn down by 19 years of rule and 13 years of frontier warfare no longer had the strength to fight. But this knowledge of approaching death did not fill me with despair. Instead, it brought the clearest understanding of achievement I had ever experienced. Death had always been my philosophical companion, but now it was my immediate reality. I could feel my strength ebbing each day, could see in my physician's eyes the truth they were too respectful to speak. I had perhaps weeks, possibly days, certainly not months. And in facing this ultimate deadline, I discovered the final secret of massive achievement. The certainty of death is not an obstacle to meaningful life, is what makes meaningful life possible. I had spent decades contemplating mortality as an abstract principle. Now, feeling death's actual approach, I understood that everything I had achieved or failed to achieve would soon be irrelevant to me personally, but potentially crucial to everyone else. This was not a source of sadness, but of extraordinary clarity about what actually mattered. In those final weeks, I wrote more intensively than I had in years, not because I feared being forgotten, but because I wanted to distill everything I had learned about living with purpose when time is limited. The approaching end stripped away every non-essential concern and revealed the core of what I wanted my life to have meant. I realized that the achievement I was most proud of was not conquering territory or implementing policies, but the simple fact that I had tried to remain a decent human being under extraordinary pressure. I had not always succeeded. There were decisions I regretted, opportunities for kindness I had missed, moments when fear had made me smaller than I should have been, but I had tried, consistently and consciously, to serve something larger than my own immediate interests. Death's certainty taught me that the only achievements that matter in the end are the ones that make life better for others. The buildings you construct will crumble, the policies you implement will be revised, the victories you win will be forgotten. But the character you model, the kindness you show, the wisdom you share, these live on in ways you will never fully know. I thought about the young officers I had mentored, who would carry forward lessons about leadership under pressure. I thought about the precedents I had set for treating enemies with dignity, which might influence future emperors to choose mercy over vengeance. I thought about the philosophical principles I had tried to embody, which might inspire others to find strength in adversity. This is what I mean by living with death's certainty. Recognizing that your time is finite focuses your attention on what deserves that precious time. When you truly accept that you will die not someday, but inevitably and possibly soon, you stop wasting energy on trivial pursuits and start investing in things that will outlast your physical presence. The fear of death makes people small and defensive. The acceptance of death makes people large and generous. When you know your time is limited, every moment becomes valuable. When you know your influence is temporary, you want that influence to be worthy of the brief time you have to exercise it. In my final campaign, I was no longer fighting just Germanic tribes. I was fighting to use whatever time remained to set an example of how to face the ultimate transition with grace. Every decision, every interaction, every moment of courage or compassion became part of a legacy that would continue after my breath stopped. This is why I tell you, do not wait until you are dying to live as if your time matters. Let death's certainty guide your priorities now. Ask yourself, if I knew I had only months to live, what would I want my life to have meant? Then live as if that question matters, because it does. As I prepare to leave this world, I want to speak directly to you who live in an age I will never see, facing challenges I can barely imagine. The particulars of your time are different from mine. Your barbarians wear suits instead of furs. Your plagues spread through networks instead of trade routes. Your battles are fought with information instead of iron. But the fundamentals of human nature and the principles of achievement remain as constant as the stars. You live in an era of unprecedented possibility and unprecedented distraction. You have access to more knowledge than any emperor could have dreamed of. Yet you struggle with the same basic challenges that faced every human being who has ever lived. How to find meaning in suffering. How to maintain integrity under pressure. How to achieve something worthwhile in the brief time you have been given. The Stoic principles I have shared with you are not ancient artifacts to be admired from a distance, but practical tools designed for exactly the kind of complex, demanding, uncertain world you inhabit. Let me show you how to apply this ancient wisdom to your modern challenges. In your professional life, you face pressures I never knew: constant connectivity, endless information, rapid technological change, global competition. But the discipline of perception I learned applies perfectly to your situation. You can choose to see change as threat or opportunity, competition as destruction or motivation, technology as master or tool. The facts of your situation are neutral until you decide what they mean. Practice the discipline of desire in your material pursuits. Your culture encourages endless wanting: bigger houses, better cars, more recognition, higher status. But I learned that wanting what you have is more powerful than having what you want. You can achieve contentment with any income if you master your desires, and no amount of wealth will satisfy you if your desires remain uncontrolled. Apply the discipline of action to your daily choices. Before making any decision, ask whether it serves virtue and the common good. This filter will guide you toward choices that create lasting value rather than temporary advantage. Your career will become more meaningful when it serves others. Your relationships will deepen when you focus on giving rather than getting. Your achievements will satisfy when they contribute to something larger than yourself. Build your inner citadel in the midst of external chaos. You cannot control market fluctuations, political upheavals, or technological disruptions, but you can control your response to these changes. Create a mental space where you remain calm regardless of external storms, where your sense of worth is not dependent on external validation. Use negative visualization to appreciate what you have and prepare for what you might lose. In a world of abundance, this practice will cure the ingratitude that makes people miserable despite their privileges. In a world of uncertainty, it will build the resilience you need to handle whatever changes come. Remember, the sympathetic are not separate from others, but part of an interconnected whole. Your success is not meaningful if it comes at others' expense. In a globally connected world, this principle is more relevant than ever. The problems you solve and the value you create should serve not just your immediate circle, but the entire human community. Most importantly, live with death's certainty even in a culture that denies mortality. Let the knowledge that your time is limited guide your priorities. Focus on what will matter when you look back from your deathbed: the character you developed, the relationships you cherished, the service you provided, the wisdom you gained and shared. The path to massive achievement has not changed since my time. Master yourself, serve others, remain virtuous regardless of circumstances, and use every moment as if it matters, because it does. These principles worked in ancient Rome, and they will work in your modern world, because they are based on truths about human nature that time cannot change. This is my final gift to you: the knowledge that you have everything you need to achieve magnificently, not in spite of your challenges, but because of them. As I write these final words, the fever burns through my body, and I can feel my strength departing like water flowing from a broken vessel. But my mind remains clear, and I want to leave you with the most important truth I have learned about achievement in my 59 years of life and 19 years of rule. The only legacy that matters is the one that lives on in the character of those who come after you. I will die in this tent along the Danube frontier, far from the marble halls of Rome, far from the comforts of civilization, far from everything that most people associate with imperial success. Yet I have never felt more successful than I do in this moment, because I understand finally what success actually means. Success is not about accumulating things that will outlast you: buildings, territories, wealth, fame. These are temporary achievements that time will erase as surely as wind erases footprints in sand. True success is about becoming someone worthy of the brief time you have been given to influence the world. I think of the young officers I have mentored, who will carry forward lessons about leading with integrity even when it costs them. I think of the policies I have implemented that put human dignity above political expedience. I think of the precedents I have set for treating enemies with respect and allies with loyalty. These intangible achievements will ripple forward through time in ways I will never know, but that matter more than any monument. The Stoic formula for massive achievement that I have shared with you can be summarized in one sentence: master yourself so completely that external circumstances cannot shake your inner peace. Then use that peace as the foundation for serving something larger than yourself. This is not easy. I have failed at it more times than I can count. There were days when fear made my decisions, when anger clouded my judgment, when exhaustion made me smaller than I should have been. But I kept returning to these principles, kept trying to align my actions with my values, kept asking myself whether I was becoming the kind of person I could respect. That persistence, not perfection, but persistent effort toward an ideal is what I hope you will remember about my life. Not the battles I won or the policies I implemented, but the daily struggle to remain human under inhuman pressures, to stay compassionate when cruelty seemed easier, to choose principle when expedience beckoned. You face pressures I never knew, and opportunities I never imagined. Your world moves faster than mine, changes more rapidly, demands more constant adaptation. But the core challenge remains the same: how to live with purpose when life seems chaotic, How to find meaning when circumstances seem meaningless. How to achieve something worthwhile when everything seems temporary. The answer is the same now, as it was in my time. Focus on what you can control: your thoughts, your choices, your responses, your character. Let everything else be what it will be. Build your achievements on the foundation of virtue, not victory. Measure your success by the service you provide, not the recognition you receive. When your time comes to leave this world, and it will come sooner than you think, the only question that will matter is whether you became the kind of person you were capable of becoming. Everything else is just elaborate distraction from this essential task. I have tried to become that person. I have not always succeeded, but I have never stopped trying. This is my legacy to you, not a perfect example to worship, but an imperfect example to follow, a human being who struggled with the same fundamental challenges you face and found a way to transform that struggle into something meaningful. Take these principles and make them your own. Adapt them to your circumstances, improve them with your insights, and pass them on to others who will face their own struggles after you are gone. This is how wisdom survives, not in marble inscriptions that crumble, but in living principles that transfer from one generation to the next, helping each person who receives them to achieve something worthy of their brief and precious time on earth. Remember me not as an emperor, but as a fellow human being who found a way to live with purpose. Take what I have learned and use it to achieve magnificently in your own life. Then pass it forward so that others may do the same. This is my final gift to you, and through you, to the future. The knowledge that massive achievement is possible for anyone willing to master themselves and serve others, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their starting point, regardless of the obstacles they face. The path is clear. The choice is yours. Begin now.